The Commanders, man. Good enough to beat any team in the league, but undisciplined and dumb enough to lose to anyone like the Bears. This team is so incredibly difficult to root for year in and year out my entire life. And they didn't just lose to the 0-4 Bears. They got crushed 40-20. It was embarrassing. It was ugly the whole way. It was never particularly close. It's not like the Bears pulled away late. They were down 27-3 at the half. They had already been embarrassed. The game was already over by halftime. Justin Fields all of a sudden looked like a fantastic quarterback. We haven't seen that in his entire career. He ended up with a career high 4 touchdown passes. They made Justin Fields look like an NFL quarterback. DJ Moore just had an absolute day. He ended up going for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now that's like an okay day for a quarterback. He put up the stats. The wide receiver one put up those stats. He was blowing by Emmanuel Forbes. We're going to get back to that because we need to have a conversation about Emmanuel Forbes, but it was embarrassing. The Commanders simply just could not run the football. They ended up having 29 rushing yards. 29 rushing yards in the entire game. 4 quarters of football. Now, of course, some of that has to do with game script. I mean, you fall down by a lot of points early. You're going to have to throw it a lot, and they did. Actually, the leading rusher was Sam Howell, who had 19 yards. That's kind of just how the game ended up going, but they couldn't run the ball. They had to throw it a lot. I think the main big concern was that the defense completely disappeared. They looked horrible. This is supposed to be the backbone of this team is Jack Del Rio's defense, and they sucked. It's not like they were playing a really good offense. They were playing the Bears. Justin Fields hadn't had a lot of success before that. Khalil Herbert had been fine, but not anything crazy. I was excited to see Khalil Herbert play because, he played at Virginia Tech, so that was cool. But looking at that team, it's not a very good offense. DJ Moore has somewhat underperformed before that. It doesn't make any sense that a good defense that's supposed to be truly elite, the offensive line that's not any good in Chicago, was stopping truly elite players on Washington's D front. It was embarrassing, not to mention Washington's offense ended up looking super incompetent, especially there in that first half.
Simply put, the game was a complete disaster. I ended up driving up to Landover with my buddy and my brother, and it sucked. We expected a win. Obviously, it didn't go our way, but honestly, I still had fun. I'm always glad to be up there. I met up with another one of my buddies who's a big Bears fan, but that was a rough one. I'm not gonna lie. They had won the last 3 games I'd gone to, and that one stung because you went in and you're like, we're the better team, and it didn't matter.
So all of a sudden, the Commanders, who started 2-0, are now 2-3. They've lost 3 straight. And what really hurts is they actually looked pretty solid in week 4. Washington ended up losing 34-31 to the Eagles in overtime. Now, for whatever reason, I don't really know why, Philadelphia just has problems with the Commanders. It seems like every single time they play, they give them a fit. In fact, Jalen Hurts' only loss last season in the regular season was against Washington in that primetime game. Honestly, I thought Washington played pretty well in that game against the Eagles. I don't think they're the same team they were last year, but I do think they're still very good. So to have a close loss to them was really good to see. The week before, though, they sucked. They lost 37-3 to the Bills. That was a complete embarrassment. Worst game of Sam Howell's pro career by a ton. I was actually supposed to go to that game, decided last minute not to, and I'll tell you right now, I'm so glad I didn't go because that would have sucked, and I was going with somebody who was a Bills fan. That would have been awful. I did go to the week 1 game against the Cardinals. Me and Darren were both there. We ended up doing a little vlog. That was cool. They won that game 20-16, and then Washington beat the Broncos 35-33. Now, those are 2 of the worst teams in the league. 2 of their wins are 2 of the worst teams in football.
I think the reality is that this Commanders team is actually not that good. You beat 2 bad teams. That really doesn't account for too much. Not only that, you had to come back to beat both of those bad teams, and it really doesn't matter that they're not that good. At the end of the day, this is a team that should be looking towards the future.
Clearly, the biggest piece of this team where all the eyes are this season is Sam Howell. He's the big focus. He's been solid. He has 1,300 yards, 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Now, that's not a great stat line, and those turnovers look bad, but he did have a terrible game against the Bills. He had 4 picks, no touchdowns, and really that one game has completely killed his stat line. If it wasn't for that, you're talking about 6 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, and all of a sudden you think he's actually playing really well. And honestly, I have been very impressed. The big issue has been sacks. He's been sacked 29 times, which is just a crazy amount of sacks. I know a lot of people are putting a ton of blame on the offensive line, and Washington's offensive line is not very good. That is a straight up fact. But watching back some of these games, watching even in real time, so many of these sacks are on Sam Howell. He's holding the ball on too long. He's kind of still getting adjusted to the pocket. In my mind, this is really kind of a rookie quarterback. Didn't really play last year, kind of sat behind Carson Wentz, Taylor Heineke. So this is a guy who's getting adjusted to the NFL level, only played 3 years in college. He's young. He's getting used to trying to not get sacked. It's almost as if he looks too comfortable in the pocket sometimes, which is such a weird issue for a rookie to have. He doesn't get super jittery. He kind of just stands in the pocket, and sometimes he stands in the pocket too long, and it results in him getting strip sacked or doing something dumb, or he'll try to extend a play when he should go down or just throw it out of bounds. And that's something that has to be learned over time. So it's not a huge concern right now, considering he's only in his 2nd season. Now, he's shown some really good flashes. You can look at some of his great plays this season and you'd be like, wow, this guy's only played in 5 games and he's put up this tape that's already this good. Sam Howell's looked good. And honestly, I actually do think the Commanders have found their QB for the future. I was very skeptical coming into this season. He was a 5th rounder for a reason, but I also loved him at UNC and thought he was really good. I think you can build around him. You just need to make the pieces around him better because they're not right now. I already mentioned the offensive line. They're an issue. They suck. They're not any good. And honestly, Ron Rivera has completely destroyed this offensive line. Just thinking back to when Rivera got to Washington, you obviously had Trent Williams, who essentially got traded to the Niners for a pack of peanuts. Brandon Sheriff ended up walking. Now he's with the Jags. And even the rest of that offensive line had some good players. I want to say that the rest of your offensive linemen were Morgan Moses, Eric Flowers, and Chase Roulier. And all of them I thought were pretty solid, not amazing players, but good enough. Roulier, unfortunately, dealt with injuries, was still in Washington. They had to just let him walk and retire. But that line was solid. It was one of the better parts of the team, and now it sucks. When it comes to the run game, that makes it harder. Brian Robinson has been fine. He has 270 yards, 3 touchdowns. Now, my main concern and kind of gripe has definitely been in the passing game. And simply put, Terry McLaurin is not being used enough. You have, I believe, a truly elite wide receiver. He's underrated. He's good. Everybody says he's underrated. Everybody knows how good this dude is now. And you've only targeted him 31 times. He only has 261 yards and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel almost has the same numbers as him. Now, I will say I've been surprised by Curtis Samuel. I really thought Jahan Dotson was going to end up being the true 240 yards, 1 touchdown so far this year. I think Dotson is super talented. I think he's going to very well fit into that number 2 role behind Terry McLaurin. But man, they need to start using these guys. Finally, you get to the defense, which has underperformed in the last few weeks, but this is still a freak defense. The defensive line is insane. Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen are at the tackle positions, and those guys are both elite. Those are 2 of the best tackles in football right there. You already have those guys locked up long term. You have an elite defense just based off of those 2, and then you talk about coming off the edge, Montez Sweat, Chase Young. Montez Sweat, a guy that I desperately wanted Washington to draft. They did. He's been good. And then you have Chase Young. Washington decided to decline his 5th-year option, and I really do think they should have picked it up. I think they're going to end up regretting that. He is a game breaker. He looks back to somewhat of his rookie year self. He's making these big plays. He's making a huge impact for that defense, and they need that. Briefly going to bring up linebacker. Don't want to talk about it. They're hard to watch, man. Jamin Davis, that was a flop of a 1st-round pick. And Cody Barton, he's not good. He's not good. Cody Barton is not good. Came over from the Seahawks. Cole Holcomb ended up walking and going to the Steelers. Holcomb wasn't great in Washington. I thought he was very okay, and he actually looks good in Pittsburgh now. So sometimes you have to wonder, some of this could have to do with scheme. At safety, Cam Curl, very good. I think Kendall Fuller's one of the more underrated corners in the league. Now, I think his biggest issue is consistency. When he's on, he's on. When he's not, he's getting cooked and making bad decisions. Now, of course, I think one of the main people that we need to talk about is Emmanuel Forbes, and that stings a little bit. You know, he was the 16th overall pick right before Christian Gonzalez went to the Patriots. I think you could end up with some kind of Jalen Reagor and Justin Jefferson situation here. A lot of people like Gonzalez. A lot of people liked Forbes. Forbes might have been overdrafted, though. Now, it is a little hard to quantify. Watching those 2 guys in college, they were very different players. Emmanuel Forbes is more of a ball hawk, going to be pretty aggressive, maybe get cooked here and there, but have those interceptions. And Gonzalez, I think, is just a true lockdown corner. Now, it really depends team to team. What are you looking for? Who do you want at that corner position? You think of a guy like Trayvon Diggs or Marcus Peters, who have been so good as ball hawks, but yeah, sometimes they get burned. Then you have other guys like Jalen Ramsey and Sauce Gardner, who are true lockdown corners. I prefer the lockdown corner. Washington went with Forbes, and he's been bad. He got abused by A.J. Brown. Again, looked pretty bad against DJ Moore. I definitely have my concerns, but there's been other times where Washington has overdrafted somebody, and I hated the pick. I think back to Jonathan Allen and Jahan Dotson, and now I look at those two guys, and I'm like, wow. And Allen, one of the top in the game, and Dotson is somebody that I think has a ton of potential. So Washington made the right calls there. Give Forbes some time. He's young. I think you might need to worry a little bit and see if he can put the pieces together, but he's young. Maybe play Benjamin St. Juice a little bit more and just let Forbes try to learn here a little bit.
When it comes to Commanders, what I want is a full reset. Blow this thing up. Let's rebuild and start from scratch. We have new ownership. It's about the right time to try to do that, but keep the big pieces. John Allen, Deron Payne, you have them locked up on defense. Figure out maybe you want to keep Chase Young or not. On offense, keep Terry McLaurin. See if Sam Howell can continue to develop. But for the most part, completely overhaul the coaching staff, and you need a lot of new players on defense. You need to completely revamp the offense, in my opinion. Keep Terry, keep Jahan Dotson. But other than that, I just think this is a team that needs maybe not a full rebuild, but certainly a nice retool. And I think starting over with a new coaching staff is the most important piece of that.
I have been very impressed with Eric Bieniemy, and the offense certainly does look different. You can see some of those remnants of the Chiefs offense. I just don't think he's in Washington next year. I do think it's very possible that Rivera gets fired this year and Bieniemy takes over as the interim, but ultimately looking into next season, I think Bieniemy leaves for a different head coaching job. I think he finally gets that call to be a head coach, and I don't believe it's in Washington. Now, the good news is he's really brought out some of the best in Sam Howell, and I now do think Howell can be a very good NFL quarterback. I don't think Washington is going to need to worry about quarterback at the draft. Now, of course, if you luck into a guy like Caleb Williams or Drake May, you take him. You go for it. Go ahead and scoop up Caleb Williams or Drake May. Now, it'd be funny to have Drake May and Sam Howell. You're talking about two UNC guys. You might as well go sign Mitch Trubisky to try to help them develop. Not to mention, if I had to have a dream head coach for next year, personally, it would be Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Lions. Funny enough, he was a quarterback at UNC. Doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things, but kind of cool to look at. Ben Johnson, love him. If I had to write down number one on my wish list, it would be Ben Johnson from the Lions. I just don't want to see Ron Rivera or even Jack Del Rio back, for that matter. You know, the defense has been underperforming. The whole team has been underperforming, but you have Ron Rivera, who's a defensive-minded head coach. Jack Del Rio's defense, it just hasn't been good enough. I do think the new ownership, Josh Harris and his group, I think they're going to want a fresh start anyways. Maybe even a fresh start with a new name as well, maybe next year or 2 years down the road. But I do think at the very least, things are headed in the right way right now without Dan Snyder, but there's still a long way to go. I have faith in Josh Harris. I believe in what he can do. I've seen what he's done, especially look at the New Jersey Devils and the way they rebuilded really fast. Some of the big moves and knowing when to move off of guys that the 76ers were really good at. Josh Harris knows what he's doing, and I have faith in him to be able to turn this team around. And whether or not he does, I'm going to be here anyway. I'm still rooting for Washington. Whether they lose every single game next year or not, I'll still be a fan. And I mean, it's been 23 years of misery. I ain't going nowhere.